Hello, friends. This is Mark Roberts from RotoWire.com, and I'm here today to share with you some fantasy rankings and auction values for 2015-2016. Thanks for checking this out. This is normally something I would post as an article on RotoWire.com, but I'm trying something a little different here and trying to make this into a video. So please let me know if you like this format better or if you would prefer just a normal article. All right, so to get into the rankings here today that I've compiled for next season, I wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit here and share with you how I do my fantasy rankings. I start with doing a projection for each player. And so just to show you an example of how that works, here is one for Damian Lillard. And what I start with is his assist rate. So his assists per 100 possessions for his first 3 years. So on average, per 100 possessions, he's averaged 8.5 assists over the course of his first 3 years. Now, if we take the improvement rate of similar players, players like Damian Lillard usually get better at assists from year 3 to year 4 to about 5% better. So that would mean if we're projecting year 4 for Damian Lillard, we would project him at 8.9 assists per 100 possessions. Then once we factor in his projected minutes that he would play and Portland's projected pace of play, we come out with a final projection of Damian Lillard's assists of 6.3 per game for next season. So I've gone ahead and done this for all of the players, for all of their fantasy stats. And then I use some standard deviation calculations to calculate their rankings and auction values. So as far as the rankings go here, there's no things like, well, I really like LaMarcus Aldridge, so I want to bump him up a couple of spots in the rankings, or I don't like player so I want to bump them down. There's no personal bias here. It's simply take what the players have done in their career, trend it forward based on similar players, what other similar players have done in the past, and then use that calculation and some standard deviation calculations to rank the players. The players that are not included in this would be like rookies for next season. Jahlil Okafor, for example, is not included here. All right, so let's get into the rankings. I'm going to try to keep this kind of short. I'll start here. I've separated this list into different tiers. There are eight tiers in this ranking list. These are the players that did not make it into the top 8 tiers, but that I thought were pretty interesting guys, and maybe some guys that people won't be interested in hearing about. So here at the bottom, we've got our bad free throw shooters. Josh Smith, Dwight Howard, and Rajon Rondo come in right at the end of the players that ranked as starting level players. A little ahead of them at spot 96 and 105, we have Kobe Bryant and Derrick Rose, who are listed there primarily because of their injury risk. Above them, just outside the top 80, is Elfrid Payton and Marcus Smart, listed at 81 and 82. They are obviously going to be second-year point guards and project to improve a little bit next year. Above them, at number 75 and 79, we have Dirk Nowitzki and Dwayne Wade, who are both first-round caliber players, 5 years ago for sure, and maybe even a couple of years ago, but have definitely fallen off. And lastly on this list, we have Reggie Jackson and Michael Carter-Williams, who were traded at the trade deadline. Reggie Jackson got a boost from being traded at the trade deadline, and Michael Carter-Williams' ranking took a hit because of the move to the Milwaukee Bucks. All right, now let's get into the top 8 tiers. As I said, I'm going to try to run through this kind of quickly here, but these 8 tiers are basically everybody who were valued higher than $15. You see Jabari Parker did sneak in here at $14. That's just because he's in this cluster of small forwards who are all pretty much valued at the same rate and will be kind of personal preference based on the drafter. Like Nicholas Batum is going to be better at assists. Ariza is probably going to be better at threes. This is also going to give you some assists. Parker probably has the most upside. Tobias Harris is probably the best scorer of the group, and maybe Chandler Parsons comes out at the best. He's the best all-around player here. And at the top of tier 8, we have some big guys. Tyson Chandler, Nerlens Noel, Joseph Nurkic, Andre Drummond, and Tim Duncan. With Nerlens Noel, I feel like if we would have put this list out at trade deadline time, I would have had to defend putting him this high at number 57. Now I feel like I'm defending putting him this low. He's really taken off lately. This might be a ranking we have to look at a little closer in the offseason. But as for now, he projects to be worth $18, ranked 57th player overall. Moving on, tier 7 takes us into the top 50 here. Again, we have some clusters of wing guys here, just outside the top 50, with Carmelo Anthony at the top of that cluster. Giannis Antetokounmpo is in that group. Andrew Wiggins is in that group. Chris Middleton, Danny Green, and Robert Covington. Again, there's some pluses and minuses here, and some players have more upside. But a fun little group, and certainly one that you could debate for who should come out on top of the group for a long time. Sorry, let's go back to that. On the top of this tier 7, you see some guys who are coming back from injury. Jrue Holiday, Ricky Rubio, a lot of the season with an injured ankle. Chris Bosh obviously had his heart ailment. All of them project right now to be healthy, so they're in these rankings, but those are situations we'll want to look for as we move into the offseason and see if anything changes there. All right, so tier 6 here. These are players in the $22 to $25 range. We see another kind of grouping here of big guys at the bottom with Greg Monroe, Derek Favors, and Al Horford. Unfortunately, this list was made before Wes Matthews' injury, so he is probably not going to rank in the top 40 next season, which is really a shame. He was having such a nice season and was so helpful to fantasy owners in the three-pointers category. Moving up this list a little bit, we see Kawhi Leonard, DeAndre Jordan, Darren Collison, who may surprise people, but who was having a real nice season before he was injured, Monte Ellis, and Mike Conley. So again, kind of a cluster of point guards here who you could debate for a little while who you would rather have on your team. All right, we're into tier 5 now, which where it gets really interesting. This is a 2-person tier. Hassan Whiteside and Rudy Gobert, both of them give you essentially the same things: rebounds, a lot of blocks, and a few points maybe, and some steals, high field goal percentage. And both are relatively big surprises for this season. And so there is some, we've talked about there being some Larry Sanders potential here. Since I put together this list, Rudy Gobert has probably had an up arrow next to his name, while Hassan Whiteside has had a down arrow. My personal preference would be to draft Rudy Gobert here because he does seem like a safer, more stable player, and also probably a better overall basketball player. We know his defensive numbers near the rim rank a lot better than Whiteside's, even though the sheer block numbers don't. And that makes it seem like his production might be a little more stable going forward. All right, now we're into tier 4, which is just a huge cluster of players who are valued at between $26 and $30. And this cluster breaks the third round from the second round. So just moving up through the list, you see Jimmy Butler and Pau Gasol from the Bulls, Kemba Walker, Kevin Love, Nikola Vucevic, which I think would be an interesting discussion next year as long as Kevin Love is on the Cavs, because they do produce similar values besides Love's three-point shooting, obviously. But Vucevic gets a lot of rebounds. Neither of them are really proficient block men if you're going to draft a big man. And moving up, we see Goran Dragic, who gets a little bit of a boost because of his move to Miami Heat. Serge Ibaka, who's falling because of his decreasing block rate. And we see a group of really 3 or 4, but really 5 point guards if you include Bledsoe here. We see Ty Lawson, Jeff Teague, Brandon Knight, Kyle Lowry, Eric Bledsoe, who are all in kind of the same grouping. Draymond Green and Blake Griffin, a couple of interesting power forwards at the end of the second round. And the tier ends with Victor Oladipo, who projects to continue to improve moving into his third season. All right, here is tier 3, which you can see is a clear cut above the tier before. We ended at a $30 player in Victor Oladipo. We moved to a $34 player in Paul Millsap. Marc Gasol, Gordon Hayward are both projected to be $34 players, as is Marcus Aldridge, and probably one of the most high risk, high reward players aside from tier 5, those centers, Whiteside and Gobert, Paul George, coming back from his injury. We may not see him play before then. We know that he has the first round fantasy relevant potential, but also we don't know what sort of lingering effects will be there with the injuries. Even though I didn't kind of slot these guys in where I wanted them to be, I think it's fitting that George ended up in the second round. I think that's a good place for his sort of risk and reward. All right, moving into tier 2. These are the late first round guys. Again, we see kind of a cluster, and these are the parts I think are interesting when you see a grouping of players of the same position. We see Kyrie Irving, Chris Paul, and John Wall at 10, 11, and 12. And, it's probably preference of what kind of sort of category you want to target. Do you want to get percentages, the best percentages and best steals of a point guard? You probably go with Chris Paul. If you want a high assist number, the highest assist number in relatively good steals, you're going to want to go with John Wall. And the best scorer of the group and best three-point shooter of the group is Kyrie Irving. 8 and 9 was an interesting tie here, essentially a tie at $43, but LeBron James just narrowly edged out Klay Thompson, who is averaging a career best in every fantasy category on a per 100 possessions basis. And I think you could be scared off of that by saying he's not going to repeat that, but I tend to believe that a lot of that is due to Coach Steve Kerr, so I think that may very well continue. And then Russell Westbrook, who has been extraordinary this season, is also slightly hampered by a poor field goal percentage that kind of keeps him out of the top tier, but he's right on knocking on the door for that group. That ends our $45 players, or our tier 2 players with a $40 to $5 player. Our tier 1 starts with a $50 player, and that's Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard's had an interesting new trend this season. You can see his steal rate for the last 3 seasons has hovered around 1 per 100 possessions, which is pretty poor for a point guard. This season, he's been around 2, which makes a big difference to his fantasy value. The other good thing about Damian Lillard is he's yet to miss a game in his career, which really comes in handy in the fantasy playoffs. All right, we keep moving up in the tier 1 players. Number 5 is DeMarcus Cousins, who has kind of sneakily had an outstanding season. You can see his block rate has steadily improved in his career. In 2 years ago, it was under 1.5 per 100 possessions. Now we're approaching 3. We're about 2.5 blocks per 100 possessions. And he's really turning into a monster. I think. Well, let's reveal this next guy, and then we can talk about him together. Anthony Davis comes in at number 4 as a $53 player. I think there's next year. Who would you rather have, Anthony Davis or DeMarcus Cousins? Cousins is probably going to be a little. He projects to kind of outpace Anthony Davis in the counting categories. Davis projects to be a little bit better in the percentage categories. And so when you're taking all 8 categories into account, Davis does come out a little higher. But that's not to say that Davis's per 100 possession numbers aren't extraordinary. They really are. The most fascinating one and the trend that looks the most promising to me is his points per 100 possessions. You can see they moved from 25 to 30 to 35 in the last 3 years, his first 3 seasons. And the chances are that Monty Williams maybe isn't back as coach. If they get somebody who's a little more creative offensively, who runs the offense through Davis a little bit more, and he continues to develop, that really could push higher and higher. Maybe between 35 and 40, but closer to that 40 points per 100 possession mark. All right, next on our list is Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is obviously a huge question mark after his recent foot surgery, which was, I guess, his 3rd of this season. We'll know more in the offseason. We'll be able to adjust this accordingly. This is, again, just based strictly on his projection and kind of a conservative estimate of how many games he would play. But the risk, the reward is there. Like, if we look at the last season that Kevin Durant was healthy, if we look at the fantasy value of each player that season, here are the top 5. You can see Anthony Davis over here at just over $50, up to LeBron James at just about $65, and Kevin Durant was at $81. So he was remarkably better than everybody else in 2013, 2014. He was super durable at that point. So, you can make the case if you can get him for $59 and he's anything close to this $81 player, you have effectively won your league. All right, with the final 2, here's the reveal. Steph Curry at 65 and James Harden at 66. If you looked at that list before, you saw Steph Curry was essentially a top 2 or 3 player before. He's only improved under Coach Steve Kerr. You can see his steals rate has moved from the two steals per 100 possession range to the 3 steals per 100 possession range. That bodes well for his fantasy value. And anyway, he didn't need a lot of help to get higher on the fantasy rankings. He's an extraordinary player. And last but not least is James Harden, who comes out at number 1 on my fantasy projections for next season. You look at his numbers, his per 100 possession numbers are pretty ridiculous. 3.4 threes per game per 100 possessions, 7.8 rebounds, 9.5 assists, 2.6 steals, 1.0 blocks, which is a huge improvement for him, and 36.8 points per 100 possessions. You can see they all have an asterisk next to them. That means they are all career highs. Just a pretty remarkable improvement for a player who was already very, very good. All right, so that's it. That's my preliminary list for 2015-2016 rankings. Again, I wanted to try something a little bit new here and do this in a video format. If you hated it and you wish that this would have just been an article that you could browse through, let me know. If you liked it, let me know so we can continue to do some of these things in the future. If you want to ask questions or have comments, you can reach out to me on Twitter. Here's my Twitter handle. And said I try to keep it short and sweet, so I'll sign off. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thanks. Bye.